So I've been talking about the 4-year cycle for Bitcoin since 2020, and things have really progressed a lot since that time. We've seen a 4-year cycle end and a new one emerge. So how is this cycle different from the previous ones, if at all? In this episode, we're going to be talking about that question exactly. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future, and let's dive right in. So in March 2020, candle 4, which is typically the reversal candle when we see a confirmed bull market in Bitcoin's price action, in March 2020 we saw a massive crash, but I spoke about this during that time, that even if we zoom out on that crash, it's as if it never really happened. And in that downside wick lies the key to understanding these 4-year cycles, or actually the candle 3 and candle 4 relationship, which is what we should be focusing on right now, because we've been talking about this even in late 2022, where wherever the candle 2 opens, candle 3 of course begins. And if you focus on candle 2 bottom here, and a downside wick in candle 3 and candle 2 bottom and downside wick in candle 3, there was reason to believe that we could see a downside wick in candle 3 of this year. But the thing about that is that we never actually got a downside wick. So if that downside wick doesn't happen earlier in the year, so around Q1 of candle 3, then we won't see that any longer. We won't see a downside wick in candle 3. However, we have to talk about the fact that we might see a candle 4 downside wick, but just notice how it never really touches the bottom of candle 2 or candle 3, getting very, very close to it. The same thing here. Bottom of candle 2 and candle 3, we never really actually get close to it, or at least touch it, but we get quite close to it nonetheless. So the thing about the upcoming candle 4 is that at the worst, we could see price go towards 15,500, but never actually touch it. So we downside wick maybe into 20k, slightly below 20k, like 18,500, before going towards the upside. Because even if we focus on this candle 3 right over here in 2019, this is where we closed the year, and this is where candle 4 opened its year. But downside wicking earlier on in the year is what happens. Same thing here. Candle 3 opens right over here, and candle 4 opens here as well, but downside wicking occurs before we go towards the upside. So going forward, wherever candle 3 has topped out, and if you just try to compare that to previous candle 3s, it's quite interesting to see how they're quite similar in terms of structure. Candle 3 in 2019 was showing us a long upside wick towards the upside. Here we got a long downside wick, so flip reverse, essentially speaking. But this candle 3 is very much similar to this candle 3, which is really interesting. We have an upside wick here as well, and even if we were to close at around these levels, very similar to 2019, then we'd probably see a 25k candle 4 emerge and then downside wick earlier in 2024. Having said that, however, there is scope for candle 3 to maybe go into the 23, 22k region, maybe close the year at around those levels. Mid-20s, I'd say, is a fair estimate. But we have to talk about that candle 4. If we open at the mid-20s, then downside wicking into the 20s wouldn't be too far-fetched if we focus on these downside wicks in previous candle 4s. So when we get that candle 4 reversal, we have to note that we then might see new all-time highs. In 2016, we didn't see new all-time highs. You can see how we got close to those old all-time highs, but never actually breached them. In this previous 4-year cycle, so in 2020 candle 4, we broke beyond those old all-time highs, rallying to new all-time highs. So could that be the case in candle 4 as well? I think that at the earliest we'd see a breakout to new all-time highs later in candle 4. At the latest, we could see it in candle 1. So 2024, around mid to late 2024, or also in candle 1 in 2025. So those are the two scenarios. Whether it's sooner or later, I feel like that's just very much influenced by the halving, because these 4-year cycles are forming or are formed by this halving event. The halving event always occurs on the candle 4, which is the trend reversal candle that confirms a new bull market. You can see that also in 2020, candle 4 right over here, and also in 2024. We're going to see a new candle 4 form yet again, which is going to be the catalyst, this halving event. Denoted in blue vertical lines, this is going to be the fundamental catalyst that will propel Bitcoin to new all-time highs either later in 2024 or late, or at least early in 2025. And this halving is a fundamental shift in the blockchain protocol where the amount of Bitcoin that gets created every 10 minutes gets cut in half. So that's a fundamental change to Bitcoin, and this impacts these 4-year cycles quite considerably. So the halving event is located in this candle 4, and this 2024 candle 4 lies ahead. So we'll probably see a strong confirmed bull market in 2024, but we have to focus on 2025 being that bull market year that peaks. 2025, that's where the Bitcoin price action is going to peak, and that's where we're going to see the beginning of a new 4-year cycle. And that new 4-year cycle begins with a bull market peak in 2025, and then in 2026 a bear market year, before we see again a candle bottoming out, candle 3. This is where Bitcoin tends to bottom out in its cycle. It's essentially macro accumulation if we compare this to history, and we tend to see some decent upside in candle 3. We tend to see some decent upside. It's a green candle after a disastrous bear market that we tend to see in candle 2. There is some decent upside, but we tend to also see some decent downside, lots of volatility. So part of macro accumulation is seeing upside volatility and downside volatility. At the moment in candle 3 this year, it's soon September, but we've already seen a lot of upside volatility. So perhaps the next part of the year, remainder of the year, is going to be a period of downside volatility. This is generally macro accumulation, where Bitcoin for the most part goes sideways within a macro range, and this range is quite large. It's essentially, for example, in this cycle, in this candle 3, this is a 100% range. So we're seeing ranging in 15,500 to around 30k, and it's something I've been talking about in a previous video where I spoke about a macro range for Bitcoin, so feel free to check that one out if you haven't already. But this is macro accumulation, candle 3, and it's this macro accumulation that prepares us for candle 4, and we tend to see candle 4 really take off after the halving event. So in this cycle, it's going to be after April 2024. That's when we see post-halving price acceleration. So when candle 4 opens in 2024, for the first quarter we could see downside volatility. We could see a revisit of 20k, maybe even sub 20k. But then after the halving, we're gonna see that price trend reverse and see Bitcoin rally towards the upside. And when we think about previous candle 4s, we always rally to at least this multi-year 4-year cycle resistance, this black horizontal. Here, candle 4 broke beyond this 4-year cycle resistance. Here, we broke to new all-time highs, so definitely we broke beyond that resistance. But in 2024, we're probably going to break beyond 46k. Even beyond that, we'll probably go to even 50k, even maybe even stretch beyond that to 55k. But 50k is a reasonable price point to assume in 2024 if we don't break to new all-time highs altogether. So candle 4 is going to break beyond 46k in 2024 after April 2024 later in the year, and then we'll probably open the new candle 1 at around maybe 50k, 55k, and then continue towards the upside into new all-time highs, should those new all-time highs occur in 2025, not earlier in 2024. And when we open candle 1 in 2025, then we'll have a limited amount of time until Bitcoin finally peaks and reaches its final new all-time high before finally breaking down into a new macro downtrend. So we tend to see upside wicks in candle ones. Those upside wicks are FOMO wicks. FOMOs get trapped at these highs, and these upside wicks are unforgiving. They occur at a peak euphoria, peak optimism, peak belief in Bitcoin being the new paradigm and solving all problems in the world. It's at that most euphoric, most exuberant time that we see candle 1 peak and produce that upside wick before beginning the new macro downtrend, which enables this next bear market in 2026. So having said all of those things, we are bottoming out. This is a macro accumulation before the next candle 4 and candle 1. There's lots to really look forward to in this market going into 2024, going into 2025. Really important to make the most of this macro accumulation. It's called macro accumulation for a reason. This is the best time to be accumulating once we've got that confirmed bear market bottom after a disastrous period of a year-long bear market. A macro accumulation phase in candle 3 is the ideal time to be dollar cost averaging and building a position for the long run if you haven't acted as a bargain buyer to really scoop up Bitcoin during the latter stages of a bear market year. So this macro accumulation is going to prepare us for the trend reversal candle that confirms the bull market, and then the bull market peak candle in candle 1. That's something we have yet to look forward to going forward. But of course, we could see price go towards the downside in the interim in the coming months going into early 2024. And I talk about that in this video in a bit more detail. So feel free to check that one out. Subscribe to the channel and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak to you soon.